Welcome to KCA Production, bringing you stories that teach, inspire, and correct. Please subscribe to KCA Production for more amazing stories. Today, we present Tales of Business World. In the heart of a growing city, where ambition moved faster than traffic, and survival often depended on how quickly one could adapt, two young men sat at a roadside cafe that had quietly become the foundation of something neither of them fully understood yet. The cafe was modest in every sense of the word. Plastic chairs arranged without symmetry, tables crashed and faded from years of use. A small television mounted in the corner played the news to an audience that barely paid attention. The air carried the mixed scent of roasted corn, fried snacks, and dust lifted occasionally by passing vehicles. It was not the kind of place people associated with success. But for Daniel and Victor, it was where everything began. They sat across from each other, as they had done almost every day for the past few weeks. Between them were two laptops, a half-empty notebook filled with scattered ideas, and the silence that spoke of both determination and uncertainty. Daniel's eyes were fixed on his screen. He wasn't just reading, he was studying. Every sentence, every line, every word mattered to him. He believed that clarity in thought translated to clarity in execution. Victor, on the other hand, struggled to stay still. His leg bounced tightly under the table as he scrolled through his phone, occasionally glancing up, as though expecting something to suddenly change. Finally, he dropped the phone on the table. "Daniel," he said, his voice carrying a mix of impatience and frustration. "We've been doing this for weeks now. Same routine, same effort, same nothing." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He finished typing a sentence, reviewed it, then slowly closed his laptop. "Not nothing," he said calmly. "Progress. It's called progress, Victor." Victor let out a short laugh. "Progress," he repeated. "We've sent out how many proposals? 30? 40? And what do we have to show for it exactly?" Daniel leaned back slightly, folding his arms. "Experience," he replied. "Clarity. A better understanding of what works and what doesn't." "No," Victor shook his head. "You can't parent with experience, you know." There it was again, the difference between them. Daniel believed in building something that would last, while Victor believed in something that would show, achieving something that others could see visibly. Daniel looked around briefly before speaking again. "Every business starts like this," he said. "It starts slow, uncertain, uncomfortable." Victor leaned forward. "Not every business," he countered. "Some people move fast. They scale quickly. They take risks." Daniel nodded slightly and said, "Some of those same people crash just as fast as they scale up." Silence followed. Not tense, but revealing. They had known each other long enough to understand that neither of them was entirely wrong. They had met 2 years earlier during a digital skills workshop. At the time, both were searching, not just for income, but for direction. Daniel had always been the type to think deeply. He had asked questions others overlooked. He paid attention to details others ignored. Even then, He was more concerned about sustainability than speed. Victor had been different from the start. Confident, outspoken, energetic. He spoke as though success was not a possibility, but an expectation. It was that contrast that brought them together. I mean, as they do say, opposites attract. Where Daniel saw caution, Victor saw hesitation. Where Victor saw opportunity, Daniel saw risk. Somehow, those differences balanced each other, at least in the beginning. The idea was simple: help small businesses build an online presence, social media management, content creation, basic branding services. Nothing overly complex, nothing revolutionary, but something that solved a real problem. And in business, solving a real problem is often more valuable than having a brilliant idea. They started with almost nothing: a borrowed laptop from a friend, or stable internet connection that failed at the worst moment, and a shared decision that they would not return to depending on chance. The first week passed with excitement, the second week with effort. By the third week, reality began to set in. No clients, no income, just messages sent and messages ignored. Victor struggled with that part the most. One afternoon, after receiving yet another rejection, he dropped his phone on the table harder than necessary. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "We're good at what we do. Why isn't it working?" Daniel remained calm, though he understood the frustration. "It is working," he said quietly, "just not yet visibly." Victor leaned back, running his hand through his hair. "That doesn't help, you know." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What do you want? Immediate success?" Victor did not hesitate. "Yes, of course." Daniel gave a faint smile. "That's not how this works." Victor looked at him, his expression more serious now. "Then how does it work?" Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "It works slowly until it suddenly doesn't." Victor frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Daniel continued, "you would build quietly, you improve constantly, you fail privately, and then one day, something clicks." Victor stared at him for a moment, then shook his head. "You sound like a motivational speaker," Daniel chuckled lightly. "And you sound like someone who doesn't want to go through the process." Victor didn't respond back, because deep down, he knew it was true. The process was uncomfortable. It required patience, discipline, consistency. Things Victor wasn't naturally drawn to, but he stayed. Because despite everything, he believed in what they were building. The sun began to shift, casting longer shadows across the street. The cafe slowly became quieter as people left to continue their day. Daniel reopened his laptop. "We still have 3 proposals left to send," he said. Victor groaned softly. "Again?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, again." Victor picked up his phone reluctantly. "You really think one of these will work? I mean, it's just 3 left." Daniel didn't look up this time. "I don't think," he said. "I know one eventually will." Victor watched him for a moment. There was something steady about Daniel, something unshaken. It wasn't confidence in the loud sense. It was belief in the quiet sense. Victor exhaled slowly. All right, he said. Let's do it. And so they continued, typing, editing, sending. Not because they were seeing results, but because they had decided not to stop. That night, as they packed up their things, Victor paused just before leaving. When this finally works, he said, we're not staying small. Daniel looked at him. We're going big, Victor continued. Real big. Daniel smiled slightly. One step at a time. Victor shook his head, half amused. You and your steps, he said. They walked away from the cafe together, blending into the movement of the city. At that moment, they were still aligned, still focused, still building. But what neither of them realized was that starting the business would not be their greatest challenge. Success would be. Time, consistency, and persistence have a way of testing belief before rewarding it. For Daniel and Victor, the days that followed were no different from the ones before. Long hours, repeated efforts, and outcomes that felt invisible. Until one afternoon, something changed. The sun was high, and the cafe was unusually quiet. Daniel was reviewing analytics from a small unpaid project they had just done to build their portfolio, while Victor lazily refreshed his email box for what felt like the 100th time that day. Then suddenly, Victor froze. His eyes narrowed at the screen. He leaned forward, then stood up abruptly, knocking his chair slightly backward. Daniel, he said, his voice sharp with disbelief. Come and see this. Daniel looked up calmly. What is it? Victor turned his laptop toward him. We got a response. Daniel walked over and read the message carefully. It was from a mid-sized business, a brand they had reached out 2 weeks ago. Not only had they responded, they were interested, very interested. Victor couldn't contain his excitement. This is it. This is what we've been waiting for. Daniel stayed composed, but there was a subtle shift in his expression. Let's read it properly, he said. The message outlined their interest in hiring them for a full digital management project, content creation, branding adjustments, and social media strategy. It wasn't a small job. It wasn't a guaranteed success either, but it was an opportunity, a real one. Victor began pacing. We need to reply immediately. Danny shook his head. No, we need to reply correctly. Victor stopped. What does that mean? It means we don't rush this, Daniel said. We respond professionally, clearly, confidently. Victor exhaled. Fine, but we're not delaying. They sat together, drafting their response. Every word mattered, every sentence with intentionality. This wasn't just another proposal. This was their first real chance to prove themselves. When they finally sent the reply, there was brief silence. Victor leaned back. So, what now? Daniel closed the laptop. Now, we wait. Victor sighed. I hate that part the most. 2 days later, the confirmation came in. They had gotten the job. Not a trial, not a maybe, a confirmed client. For a moment, everything felt surreal. Then, Victor shouted, We got it! The cafe owner looked over in confusion as Victor laughed, running his hands over his head. Daniel smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. Not loud, but meaningful. This moment validated everything. The project began immediately, and with it, a new level of pressure. This was no longer practice, no longer theory. This was execution. They worked tirelessly, Late nights became normal, sleep became optional, focus became everything. Daniel handled structure, planning, and client communication. Victor handled execution, creativity, and fast decision making. Together, they delivered. They revised content multiple times, adjusted strategies, analyzed performance metrics. They didn't just want to complete the job, they wanted to exceed expectations. And when the project finally ended, the client responded positively, very positively. Not only were they satisfied, they were impressed. Victor read the feedback aloud. They said we exceeded expectations. Daniel nodded slowly. That's good. Victor laughed. That's more than good. That's everything. But it didn't stop there. The client referred them to other businesses. Within a week, they had more inquiries, more interests, more work, more people looking into them. Their income increased, not dramatically, but enough to change something internally. Confident. For the first time, they were no longer chasing opportunity. Opportunities were starting to come to them. They upgraded slightly. Better internet, improved tools, more structured workflow. The cafe slowly became less central as they began working from a small shared space they could barely afford. It wasn't luxury, but it was progress. Success, even in small amount, has a way of changing perspective. For Daniel, it brought clarity. For Victor, it brought possibility. But not just any possibility. Speed, scale, expansion. Victor began to think beyond where they were, beyond steady growth. He wanted more, and he wanted it faster. One evening, after reviewing their monthly earnings, Victor leaned forward. This is just the beginning, he said. Daniel nodded. Yes, which is why we need to stay consistent. Victor shook his head. No, which is why we need to grow faster. Daniel looked at him carefully. How? Victor smiled slightly. We take bigger clients, charge more, move faster. Daniel didn't respond immediately because he saw something different in Victor today. Not just ambition, urgency. And urgency can be dangerous when out of control. The foundation had been built, the first success had been achieved, but with it came something they were not fully prepared for: expectation, pressure, and the quiet beginning of imbalance. Success rarely announces the moment it begins to change people. It happens quietly in thoughts, decisions, expectations. For Daniel and Victor, the shift didn't happen overnight. It started with small conversations, small disagreements, small differences in direction. At first, barely noticeable. Their workload increased. More clients meant more responsibility. More responsibility meant more decisions. And with every decision, their differences became clearer. Victor thrived in the fast pace. He enjoyed the pressure, the movement, the feeling of growth. But he wanted more, always more. Daniel, on the other hand, remained steady, focused, careful. He reviewed every step, analyzed every outcome, planned every move. One evening, they sat in their workspace reviewing their current project. Victor broke the silence. We're thinking too small. Daniel looked up. Explain. Victor leaned forward. We're limiting ourselves. We should be handling bigger clients by now. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. Victor, we're not ready. Victor frowned. Not ready. Based on what? Based on capacity, Daniel replied. We're already stretching ourselves, barely able to meet deadlines. Victor shook his head. That's how growth works. You stretch. Daniel nodded. Yes, but you don't break. The tension was subtle, but real. Victor stood and began pacing. Look at other businesses. Daniel, they're not like us. They've increased and grown faster than we have in the last few weeks. Daniel responded calmly, and many of them collapsed just as fast. Victor stopped. You always say that. Because it's true, Victor replied. Or maybe you're just afraid to take risk. The room went quiet. The word lingered. Afraid. Daniel didn't react immediately, but something shifted. Do you really think that? Daniel asked quietly. Victor hesitated, then shrugged. I think you overthink things. Daniel leaned back. And I think you underestimate consequences. This wasn't just a difference in opinion anymore. It was a difference in philosophy. That night, they worked, but not together. Same room, different focus, different energy. This was the beginning, not of failure, but of division. And in business, division is often the first sign of decline. Victor began exploring opportunities on his own. Bigger deals, faster growth, more riskier moves. Daniel noticed, but didn't confront immediately. He believed communication would fix it, that understanding would restore balance. Well, he was wrong. Opportunity did not always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it comes wrapped in excitement, but rooted in pressure. Sometimes it looked like progress, but carried the weight of consequences not immediately visible. And sometimes, they test not just your ability, but your judgment. For Daniel and Victor, the opportunity came on a quiet afternoon that felt no different from any other. The air in their workspace was calm, interrupted only by the soft hum of a standing fan struggling against the heat. Papers were scattered across the desk, client briefs, handwritten notes, rough strategy outlines. The laptop sat open, each displaying different tasks in progress. Daniel was focused, as always. His attention moved carefully between documents, refining a campaign report for an existing client. Every detail mattered to him. Tone, structure, accuracy. He worked like someone who understood that consistency was what separated professionals from amateurs. Victor, on the other hand, was restless. He had finished his tasks early, but couldn't settle. His mind was always searching for the next move, the next opportunity, the next level. He opened his email again, not expecting anything, just checking. Then he paused. There was a new message, unread. The subject line alone was enough to shift his posture. He leaned forward slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read it again. Then he clicked. The email loaded. Victor's expression changed almost instantly. His casual demeanor disappeared, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Daniel, he said quietly. Daniel didn't look up immediately. Come and see this. There was something different in his tone. No excitement, no frustration, something heavier. Daniel noticed. He stood up, walking toward Victor. And as Victor turned the screen toward him, Daniel began to read. The email was from a company that they both recognized. Not just any company. A well-established brand with a strong market presence. The kind of company they had only imagined working with. The kind of company that didn't usually reach out to people at their own level. Daniel read carefully. Every line, every detail. every expectation. The company had discovered their work through a referral, one of their recent clients. They were impressed, interested, and ready to discuss a full-scale digital partnership. The scope of the project was massive: content strategy across multiple platforms, brand repositioning, campaign execution with measurable targets, consistent delivery under strict timelines. And the budget was unlike anything Daniel and Victor had handled before. It wasn't just higher, it was transformative. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Victor broke the silence. "This is it," he said, his voice low but intense. "This is the kind of opportunity that changes everything, that finally pays off." Daniel didn't respond immediately. He was still processing, not just the offer, but what it meant. "This is exactly what we've been waiting for," he continued. "This is the level we've been trying to reach." Daniel finally spoke. "Yes," he said, "it is." Victor turned to him. "So, we take it?" Daniel paused. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. "You don't decide that immediately," he said. Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we need to evaluate this properly." Victor let out a short laugh. "Evaluate? What is there to evaluate? It's a big client, big money, big exposure." Daniel shook his head slightly. "And big responsibility." Victor stopped pacing. "That's the point," he said. "We need to step up." Daniel met his guess. "Stepping up doesn't mean overreaching." Victor's expression tightened. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Slowing things down when we should be moving fast." Daniel walked back to his seat and sat down. "This project requires more than we currently have," he said calmly. Victor followed him. "Like what, Daniel?" "Time, structure, manpower," Daniel replied. "We're already handling multiple clients. This will stretch us beyond capacity." Victor shook his head dismissively. "We'll adjust." Daniel looked up at him. "Adjustment is not a strategy." Victor leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "Listen to me," he said, his voice more intense now. "Opportunities like this don't come twice." Daniel didn't look away. He responded back. "And mistakes like this don't get corrected twice either." Silence. Victor straightened up, frustrated. "So what are you saying? We say no?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'm saying we prepare first. We assess what we need, then we respond." Victor laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "By the time we finish assessing, they'll move on." Daniel nodded. "That's possible." Victor stared at him. "And you're okay with that?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Yes, of course." That landed heavily. Victor's expression changed. Not just frustration now, disbelief. "You're actually okay with letting this go?" he asked. Daniel's voice remained steady. "I'm okay with building something sustainable." Victor shook his head slowly. "That's the difference between us." He turned away, walking toward the window. Outside, the city moved endlessly. Cars passing, people walking, businesses opening and closing, opportunities being taken and lost every second. Victor watched it all. And in that moment, he felt something stronger than ambition. Urgency. "If you don't take this," he said without turning, "someone else will." Daniel replied, "That's true." "And you're fine with that?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Victor walked back slowly, his movements more deliberate now, more decided. "This is bigger than where we are," he said. Daniel responded, "And that's exactly why we need to be careful." Victor shook his head. "No, that's exactly why we need to take it, to stretch us." Their voices didn't rise, but the tension in the room did. Victor picked his phone. Daniel noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" he asked. Victor didn't look up. "I'm replying." Daniel stood up. "Victor." Victor cut him off. We're not losing this. Daniel's voice hardened slightly. We are not ready. Victor finally looked at him and said, I am. That single sentence changed everything. Not we, I. Daniel felt it immediately. The separation between them. This was no longer a shared decision, it was a personal one. Victor turned back to his phone and began typing. Fast, confident, certain. Daniel just stood there watching him, not speaking, not interrupting. Because at that moment, he understood something clearly. The biggest threat to their business was no longer external. It wasn't competition, it wasn't lack of clients, it wasn't growth. It was misalignment. Victor finished typing, read through the message once, then hit send. The sound was soft, almost insignificant, but its impact was not. Victor dropped his phone on the table and exhaled. It is done, he said. Daniel didn't respond. He simply sat down slowly, because deep down, he knew something was going to happen. Some decisions don't feel dangerous when they are made. They feel exciting, promising, necessary. But time reveals what emotions hide. And for Daniel and Victor, this decision was not just about a client. It was the beginning of everything falling apart. Every decision carries consequences. Some are immediate, others take time to reveal themselves. For Daniel and Victor, the decision to take on the major project did not explode overnight. It began slowly, like pressure building beneath the surface. The first few days felt exciting. New meetings, new expectations, new energy. Victor took charge immediately, responded to the client with confidence, outlining timelines that were ambitious, aggressive, optimistic. Daniel noticed, but at that point, the decision had already been made, so instead of resisting, he adapted. Their workload doubled almost instantly. The new client demanded constant updates, frequent revisions, strategic adjustments. This was not like their previous projects. This was bigger, more complex, and less forgiving. Their once manageable schedule became overwhelming. Deadlines overlapped, tasks piled up. Sleep became very much irregular. One night, close to midnight, Daniel sat in front of his laptop, eyes slightly strained as he reviewed a campaign draft for the third time. Victor walked in holding his phone. They want changes. Again, he said. Daniel didn't look up immediately. What kind of changes? Victor exhaled. They want a complete shift in tone. Different direction entirely. Daniel looked up. This means we have to redo everything. Victor shrugged. Then we redo it. Daniel leaned back. We don't have time. Victor responded quickly. Then we make time. That had become Victor's solution to everything. Push harder, move faster, ignore limits. Daniel rubbed his forehead slightly. This isn't sustainable, he said. Victor frowned. What do you mean? Daniel gestured toward the screen. We're already behind on 2 other clients. Now this one is demanding full attention. Victor's tone sharpened. This is the client that matters right now. Daniel looked at him carefully. They all matter. Victor shook his head. No, this one is different. And he was right, but not in the way he thought. Pressure does not just test systems, it tests people. As the days passed, the cracks began to show. Small at first, missed details, delayed responses, reduced quality in smaller projects. Daniel noticed everything. Victor ignored most of it. Their communication changed, shorter conversations, less collaboration, and more tension. Victor became more dominant in decision making, faster, more assertive, less consultative. And Daniel, he became quieter, more observant, more cautious, more concerned. One evening, after a long day of work, Daniel finally spoke. "We need to slow down," he said. Victor didn't look up. "We can't." Daniel's voice remained calm. "If we don't, we are going to make serious mistakes." Victor replied, "Mistakes happen. We fix them." Daniel shook his head. "Not at this level." Victor finally looked up. "You're overthinking again." Daniel responded quietly, "And you're underestimating yet again." The balance they once had was fading. The partnership still existed, but alignment had long slipped. And as pressure increased, so did the distance between them. Success had brought opportunity had brought pressure, and pressure was beginning to reveal the cracks that had always been there. For Daniel and Victor, the mistake started quietly, almost unnoticeable. A missed email, a delayed deliverable, a piece of content published without full review. Individually, these things were minor, but put together, they formed a pattern. The first real issue came from one of their earlier clients, a brand that had worked hard to impress. Daniel read the message aloud. "They are not happy," he said. Victor sighed. "What now?" Daniel continued. "They said engagement has dropped and they haven't been getting timely updates." Victor leaned back. "We've been busy." Daniel looked at him. "That's not their problem." Victor did not respond, because deep down, he knew that Daniel was right. But he didn't care about that. The new client was consuming everything: time, energy, attention, and the others were suffering. And to Victor, the new client was everything. Another issue followed, then another. One client paused their contract, another reduced their scope. Income started to fluctuate, not drastically, but slowly. Daniel tracked everything, every loss, every complaint, every decline. Victor dismissed most of it. "We'll recover," he said repeatedly. But recovery requires control, and control was slipping. The breaking point came during a major presentation for the new client. They had spent days preparing slides, strategies, visuals. Everything needed to be perfect, but it wasn't. Midway through the presentation, the client interrupted. "This isn't aligned with what we discussed." Victor froze slightly. Daniel stepped in, calm, composed, trying to recover, but the damage had been done. After the meeting, silence filled the room. Victor finally spoke. "That wasn't our fault." Daniel turned slowly. "It was." Victor frowned. "But how?" Daniel stepped closer. "We rushed the preparation. We didn't review properly. We didn't align." Victor shook his head. "No, they changed expectations." Daniel's voice remained steady. "And we didn't catch it." Silence. This time, he couldn't argue, because the truth was clear, and they were no longer operating at their best. They were reacting, not leading, and in business, that is dangerous. Mistakes don't destroy businesses immediately, but they weaken them slowly, consistently, until one final moment, everything breaks. Betrayal is rarely sudden. It's built. For Daniel and Victor, it began long before the moment it became obvious. Victor started making decisions alone, small at first, then bigger, adjusting strategies without discussion, communicating with clients independently, positioning himself as a primary decision maker. Daniel noticed, but he didn't speak up. Not because he couldn't, but because Victor wouldn't listen. One evening, everything became clear. Daniel walked into the workspace earlier than usual. Victor wasn't there, but his laptop was open. Daniel didn't intend to check, but something caught his attention. An email thread. He paused. then looked closer. It was from the major client, and what he saw changed everything. Victor had been communicating separately, making agreements, adjusting terms. Without him, Daniel sat down slowly, reading every message carefully. Each line confirmed it. Victor wasn't just taking control, he was separating, positioning himself as the business. When Victor walked in later, he stopped. Daniel was seated, quiet. Still, you're early, Victor said. Daniel looked up. I saw the emails. Victor didn't respond immediately. Then, it's not what you think. Daniel shook his head slowly. It's exactly what I think. Victor stepped forward. I was handling things. Daniel stood. Without me? Victor hesitated, then said it. I needed to. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a justification. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. He didn't need to, he said quietly. He chose to. Victor exhaled. He was slowing things down. The words landed hard. And so, you decided to move without me? Victor didn't deny it. Because it was true. The partnership was broken. Not completely, but almost. In business, failure is not always caused by competition or lack of opportunity. Sometimes it's caused by two people or three who stop moving together. And in that moment, Daniel and Victor were no longer partners. They were just two individuals standing on opposite sides of the same story. After the betrayal, nothing felt the same. The workspace was still the same. The desks, laptops, unfinished notes, but the energy was completely different. Daniel no longer spoke to Victor unless it was necessary. They worked in the same room, but no longer together. The projects, the one that was supposed to elevate them, began to show visible signs of strain. Deadlines slipped, quality dropped. The client noticed, and this time not subtly. They reached out. We are concerned, the client said, their tone firm. This is not the level of consistency we expected. Daniel nodded. We understand. Victor jumped in. We're resolving it. After the call, silence filled the room. Daniel spoke first. This is exactly what I warned about. Victor didn't respond, so Daniel continued. We were not ready. Victor finally looked up at him. And doing nothing would have been better? Daniel met his guess. Doing it right would have been better. Victor exhaled, frustrated. We're already in it. We can't go back. No, we can't, Daniel said. But we could have prevented this. That word again. Prevented. Victor looked away because he knew that it was true. Daniel stopped correcting everything. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something important. You cannot fix a system that is fundamentally broken. Victor continued pushing forward, faster, harder, trying to compensate. But speed could not fix structure. And one evening, the breaking point came. An email arrived from the client. Daniel opened it and read it. What is it? Victor said. Daniel turned the screen towards him. The contract. It's been terminated with immediate effect. Victor stared at the screen, read it again and again. No, he said under his breath. Daniel didn't speak because there was nothing left to explain. The client's message was clear. Missed expectations, inconsistent delivery, loss of confidence. Everything Daniel had feared had happened. Victor stepped back slowly. This doesn't make sense, he said. We can fix this. It's already done, Daniel said. No. We just need to talk to them. Daniel's voice was calm. They've already made their decision. Victor paced, restless. desperate. This was our biggest deal, he said. We can't lose this. Daniel looked at him. We already did. That was the moment it hit. Not gradually, not partially, fully. The loss and the consequence. Victor stopped pacing. For the first time, he had no response. Daniel packed his laptop slowly. Victor watched him. Where are you going? Daniel paused. I need space. Victor stepped forward. So that's it? Daniel looked at him. That depends. On what? Daniel's answer was simple. On whether this is still a partnership. Collapse is not just about losing something external. It's about realizing what was lost internally. Trust, alignment, respect. And without those, no business survives. And this was the fate of Victor and Daniel. Thank you for watching Tales of Business World. Please like, share, subscribe, and remember to check back for more inspiring stories.